Hey everybody, Eric Grenier here with Philippe J. Fournier for this week's episode of The Numbers. Philippe, it is gray, it is dreary here in Ottawa. How is it there in Montreal?
November rain, my friend. All guns and roses. It's gray and rainy and cold. And it's a perfect time to talk about politics.
Is it?
We're close to the end of the parliamentary sessions across the country. We have an election that's going down to the wire. We have lots of stuff federally, polls in Quebec that we had this week. And so we have tons to talk about. So when you look outside, go like, okay, it's better to chat with you now and our members and our listeners than just think of the dread of the late fall season. But let's get into it.
That's a positive way to look at it. So we're going to talk a lot about the Nova Scotia election, which is on Tuesday. We're going to go a little bit around the map and give our prognostications on what to expect on Tuesday. And we're doing a live stream, I believe, right?
Oh, I think so. It's Atlantic time on top of that, so it's good for us. Won't be as late as BC, so yeah.
Yeah, okay, we're going to do that. But first, we're going to talk about stuff that's happening at the federal level. We did have a few polls that came out. There was also just the news that came out this morning about the Liberals and the NDP going to agree on a GST cut for various items for the next few months, and apparently some sort of checks are going to be coming out to some Canadians, the lower income, I imagine, in the new year. Sounds a little bit like Doug Ford over in Ontario. So it does seem like, at the very least, this Parliament will continue until the new year. The NDP does seem like it's going to support the government. So we're not going to be having an election over the next few weeks. And the polls out, especially this morning, suggest that it's good news for the Liberals. Maybe the NDP would have some second thoughts. So we had two polls. The Nanos one, that is the usual one, 40% for the Conservatives, 25% for the Liberals, 19% for the NDP. We'll get into that. And one from Abacus, which had 43% for the Conservatives. Again, this was out just on Thursday morning. 21% for the Liberals, 21% for the NDP, a tie.
Yeah.
The streams have crossed. That's usually a bad thing, and it's certainly a bad thing for the Liberals. What are your thoughts as we look at these numbers this morning?
Well, it's certainly a bad thing for the Liberals. I think we can all agree on that. But also, this happened before earlier this fall, and so again we look at the average. If we look at the progression of polls over the past, I want to say year and a half, but let's just keep it since the summer. Abacus has had the Liberals a bit lower than other pollsters. I mean, not by much, just by 2 or 3 points. But 2 or 3 points here make a big difference, right? I mean, the last poll from Léger had the Liberals at 25. I think if we had an election and the Liberals are at 25 or 21, it's a defeat both ways, but being at 21 really hurts. Like, you're getting close to Michael Ignatieff territory. Whereas 25, you can say, okay, we lost, 8 points since 2021. It's a defeat after a decade in power. I think the narrative around the outcome of a potential election with these numbers, with Abacus's numbers, are absolutely terrible. Like, when you get close to like the low 20s and tied with the NDP, which is not led by a very popular leader if we look at, again, Abacus's numbers. So no good news for the Liberals, but go with the average for now. I think is it a 22 point gap, or is it a 17 point gap? Either way, it's a loss, but seat-wise, it makes a big difference.
Yeah. And, we should remind ourselves that while this is the 21% tie for the Liberals and the NDP, compared to Abacus's last poll, which was done just a few weeks ago, this is a drop of 1 point for the Liberals and a jump of 1 point for the NDP. So it isn't a statistically significant move.
That's right.
And it's more of a reflection of the fact that these two parties are kind of close to begin with. So we're going to have these kinds of numbers. And for the Nanos one, you seem to have marked this out as an important thing to note. It's been rounded up to 20% in the NDP, the Nanos PDF and everywhere you've seen it. But if you dig down into the numbers, the NDP has 19.48% support, so should be rounded down to 19. This is an important thing that we should discuss for a long time. But it just kind of shows why maybe you don't need to go to this many decimal points.
No,
I don't know why they go down to 2 decimal points in the nanos.
I mean, it's
Nanos
it's fine. It's there. It's just that, if you're gonna have the decimals, respect the way you round.
them.
But I think
some
maybe in the machine it was rounded to 19.5, and when you see 19.5, you round to 20, which is fine. But I noticed it was 19.48. So I mean, I was sent many messages this week. You wrote 19 for the NDP. It's actually 20. And I was like, okay, first, it doesn't make a difference. And second, I just went to the source. So it's 19. But who cares, right? It's a quarter of a poll per week for nanos, and we're talking about 1 point for the third party. So, but yes, I did mention it in our little document. Well, I didn't want to be that guy. Well, actually... But
maybe you are that guy. But anyway, those 2 polls, you have 19% for the NDP, 21% for the NDP. So they're doing okay. The Liberals being between 25 and 21 probably indicates that the Liberals are closer to 23 rather than that 21. But it does put into some context what's happening on Parliament Hill. So one of the things that the Liberals are going to get for this GST cut that they're going to have on various items, that the NDP is already beating their chest a little about, saying that the Liberals are caving to the NDP's demands on this, is that they're going to be able to move past some of the procedural hiccups in the House of Commons where there's a filibuster going on led by the Conservatives. So there is going to be an exchange there. I guess, in the NDP... looking at these kinds of numbers, a tie in the Abacus poll, only behind by a few points in nanos. We've seen this in a few other surveys now. Yeah. They do not seem to be bullish for an election despite these numbers. So it does suggest that they understand that even if they are in a not bad position relative to the Liberals, they're still probably in a bad position relative to where they would like to be, because the Conservatives are at 43, they're at 40 in the nanos poll. Yeah. And if you look at the Abacus survey, the Conservatives have a big lead in British Columbia. They have a huge lead in Ontario, which is probably going to cost the NDP some seats. There isn't a lot of other good news for the NDP to make them want to maybe risk an election, despite the fact that they could, if an election were held today, potentially finish ahead of the Liberals, at least in the popular vote.
Yeah, but none of the seats. That's the thing.
Probably
I mean, unless you have a major additional collapse for the Liberals, I just don't see where would the NDP gain seats. I mean, they have half of their caucus. We mentioned this before in British Columbia. I don't think they can replicate this. The Conservatives' numbers out west are too strong. So perhaps they could save face in many places. We know the Liberals are going to take a hit in BC with these numbers. But just imagine you say, you know what, that's enough of the Liberals, let's go into an election, and then you're reduced to 15 seats because the Conservatives have won 220. Great job, everyone. I mean, it's probably going to happen anyway, but there's a difference between a maybe and a sure thing. Again, you're not as strong as your best polls. You're not as weak as your poorest polls. If we go back to earlier this month, the Léger poll, I always go back to Léger because they're among the best out there, but they had the NDP at 15. Between 15 and 20, there's a huge difference for the NDP. And being at 15, they would have trouble getting to the official party status. At 20, they could maybe save face. So... but what you just said, I didn't have time to read the news this morning. I brush up on the news throughout the week, but not this morning. What you just said about the rebates and the GST, again, it sounds a lot like Doug Ford. So I'm looking forward to see all those people who said, oh, can you imagine what Doug Ford is doing, trying to buy away the electorate? And then you turn around and it's like, oh, okay, are they doing that at the federal level too? I guess they have polls on this. I guess they have data that shows that it's a good idea. It will please people. I'm saying I guess. I hope they do, because you don't take a decision like this without having some good internal numbers on this decision. the blatant trying to buy the election. I don't know. The thing is, Ford is doing it in a position of strength, right? He's
Right.
far and away ahead of the OLP in Ontario and the Ontario NDP. But the Liberals are not doing that from a position of strength. It looks desperate.
Well, they're trying to shore up their position as trying to address affordability issues, which, they have to do something. So this is something.
This is something.
So they are at least trying to do something, but we just haven't seen any indication that whatever they do ends up moving the numbers at all. We already know that the NDP is going to take credit for this. Whether they will get credit from this for this from the voters, we'll have to wait and see. But a lot of these kinds of things, when you're this far behind, they are kind of seen, as you said, as a bit desperate, right? There is a difference there. And I'm not sure if it's going to work, but at least they're doing something. They're throwing something up against the wall, and I guess they'll see what kind of impact it's going to have. And if it does buy them a little bit longer, because it'll mean the NDP will support them, then I guess that is a win for the Liberals in terms of their own survival. They still do seem to be trying to wait things out in hopes that it'll get better. That kind of is the strategy that seems apparent to me, that they don't really have a big plan to get back to competitiveness with the Conservatives, but if the longer they wait, maybe something will happen, maybe something will break. The Trump administration coming in, maybe there's an opportunity there to try to lead through a crisis, but there's a lot more kind of hope and prayers guiding some of the strategy, it seems to me.
Without any partisanship, I just think that giving away government money to people when you're in a big deficit is not ideal. I mean, the CEQ is going through this right now. They're paying the price for having mismanaged public funds, right? So short-term gains for long-term pains, maybe. I don't think the Liberals are thinking long terms with this, but we'll see. I mean, if they do get a bump out of that, how many times have we said that in the past year? Well, maybe they'll get a bump out of that. There was the budget. Nothing seems to work. So why try something else? Well,
Why not? We'll see. Not? There was a poll that also came out from Nanos that I wanted to discuss. I usually hate these polls.
Oh.
Nanos, yeah, I know.
Okay.
Bear with me.
All right.
Nanos often puts out these surveys about whether Justin Trudeau should resign and who could replace him, which is fine as like a question to ask. But the results were always reported with only all of Canadians or by region, which to me is largely useless. I'm not that interested to know whether Conservatives think Justin Trudeau should resign or whether Bloc voters think Justin Trudeau should resign. That doesn't really matter. And when a party is at 20-25% support in the polls and 57% said that Trudeau should be replaced, that's not shocking. A majority aren't voting for the Liberals, so why would they think that Trudeau should stay there? But this time, Nanos did something more interesting, which I appreciated. So they asked whether Trudeau should stay as leader or whether the Liberals should find a new leader to replace him. 24% said he should stay, which matches kind of their voting intentions, and 57% said he should be replaced. But this time, Nanos did actually try to break it down by voting intentions, or at least how voters usually vote. And this was the key part. They asked, who do you usually vote for? A lot of voters said they usually vote for the Liberals, more than are actually going to vote for the Liberals. And a lot lower number said that they usually vote for the Conservatives, a lot lower than will actually vote for them. But then what was the big surprise from these numbers is that 28% of people who usually vote for the Liberals thought he should stay. 55% thought he should resign. The numbers were actually better for Trudeau among Conservative voters. People who usually vote for the Conservatives, only 52% thought he should resign. And then people who say that they don't usually vote for a party, 22% said he should stay, 59% said he should resign. So not by voting intentions now, but by people's usual position on the spectrum, it doesn't really make much of a difference. The same amount of people think Trudeau should stay, and the same amount of people think he should resign. Yeah.
I mean, are you surprised, though, by these numbers? Because I'm glad to have them, but I'm not sure I'm reading the tea leaves and reading the numbers over the few last months. I look at this as like, yeah, many conservatives really want to beat Trudeau. And I think many would feel that if Trudeau left, yeah, they'd be happy because they don't like him. But also they would feel like he's like getting away before the fight. When the going gets tough, the tough get going, right? Thing is, Monsieur Trudeau really clearly indicated that he's going. And there was...
Going to stay.
Yeah, going to stay.
Yeah.
And going to the next election, I meant.
Okay.
And the mini caucus revolt we saw last month, we thought it would go somewhere. It really didn't go anywhere. They folded.
Really?
They folded as soon as they were confronted with their colleagues. So, I mean, these numbers will, keep being measured by pollsters. I'm very curious to see how they change over time. But I don't think it's going to change. I mean, at this point, we should understand that it won't change Trudeau's mind. Like, even if 100% of respondents says, yeah, Trudeau should go, he would say, no, I'm staying. So it's not going to change anything in the short term, unless now I say this and watch this afternoon a news conference and the Prime Minister leaves. Of course, the Numbers podcast curse. Many Liberal voters are those who usually vote Liberals, as you said. They're done with Justin Trudeau and they think he should leave. It's just that there's no, heir apparent. Yeah. And I think the Liberals are stuck here. So, it was interesting numbers from Nanos. But it's much more useful to see those numbers broken down by party affiliation than by region or gender or age, right?
Yeah,
I agree.
And it does also show, because it was usually Liberal voters, it does suggest to me that the chunk that are usually Liberals but aren't this time probably are among those who especially think that Trudeau should resign, right? So it does kind of show that the base of the Liberals could theoretically be as big as the Conservative base, that they haven't completely lost that, but a lot of them have gone over to another party. One last bit on federal polling that I wanted to talk about, because I do think it's an interesting result.
Yeah,
as it goes against what we've been expecting. So in the Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean region in Quebec, so this is Chicoutimi and Jonquière and the city of Saguenay, which includes them both. There was a polling done by the local radio station there from Segma, and they polled in Jonquière, which the Bloc holds, and they voted in Chicoutimi, which the Conservatives hold.
Yep.
The Bloc led by 30 points in Jonquière and led by 18 in Chicoutimi. Yeah. I'm curious your thoughts on this, because Chicoutimi-Le is a Conservative hold. They hold it now.
Yeah.
And Jonquière was supposed to be a Conservative target seat, and this would suggest that it isn't. So what these results were a bit of a surprise to me.
They were a surprise, but I think there's a major asterisk there that it was mentioned in a poll report, but this is of the city of Jonquière, right? And so,
and Chicoutimi,
Chicoutimi, which is sorry, city of Saguenay, which includes both. But both ridings, Chicoutimi-Le and Jonquière, they spread way past the limits of Jonquière and of Saguenay. And so the poll said this is only of the city of Saguenay. So it's not as bad as we think for the Liberals in here. When we look at poll by poll, outside of the city of Saguenay, the Conservatives did better. But if we look at the 2021 numbers in Chicoutimi-Le, Richard Martel, the Conservative MP, he won by 6 points. That is not a very comfortable margin, especially with a surging Bloc in the polls. I mean, surging. Yeah, the Bloc is above what they had 3.5 years ago. What is surprising, however, is that we see in the polling average, the Conservatives are doing okay in Quebec. They're not dominating as they do in other provinces. But they have improved, but it looks like they haven't improved there. And so what does that tell you? That tells you that maybe what we mentioned last week with the poll that had the language breakdown, maybe the Conservatives are doing better with linguistic minorities in Quebec, Anglophones, Allophones. And maybe in Francophone Quebec, either the Conservatives are stable or they could bleed some support, especially in the Jonquière and Chicoutimi area, which is when the Bloc and the Parti québécois do well, those voters, they do come out. Yeah, the bloc. I think the bloc is heading toward a very strong outing. These numbers suggest as much.
Yeah, those more nationalist regions of the province might be harder for the Conservatives to break into. So maybe they're going to run up the numbers a little bit more in Quebec City and the areas that they already hold. And it would be interesting if we end up on election night that the Conservatives have gained 100 seats outside of Quebec and have lost one in Quebec. That would be a bit of a surprise result, but wouldn't be the first time that Quebec kind of goes in a different direction than
no,
the
it
rest
wouldn't
of the
be.
country. Okay, I want to talk about Nova Scotia, but because we're going to go deep into it, maybe we'll save it for the last segment. We'll talk quickly about another survey that came out of Quebec, this one provincially, because it is something we're going to have to talk about over the next, probably the next 8 months. Why don't you take it away?
So there will be, once the federal election is called, Éric Lefebvre, formerly of the CAQ, now independent MNA of Arthabasca, this is in the center of Quebec, Victoriaville, and so just south of Trois-Rivières. So he's going to resign because he's going to run for the federal Conservatives, and so he will resign his seat of Arthabasca. And this has been a very good CAQ seat, even before the CAQ took power. So Segment Recherche, same poster again, did a poll for the Parti québécois, so let's be careful here, 30 for the PQ, 26 for the Quebec Conservatives, and 23 for the CAQ among decided voters. And this was not, I think it was 350 cases, so there's a margin of error of plus or minus 5, but it still shows the CAQ going from the mid-50s in the election to 23%. And the Parti québécois going from 10% in the election to potentially 30% here. It kind of indicates that in Francophone Quebec, the numbers that we see province-wide the trends are correct. Like the CAQ has lost half or more than half of its support, and it's the Parti québécois basically siphoning off those voters. And the interesting part here is that we see the Quebec Conservatives, Éric Duhem, they had 25% of the vote in the election in that riding. They didn't come close, but they came in second. And in this poll, 26%. So the provincial Conservatives in that region and most of Quebec, they're holding. They're not going anywhere. They haven't grown that much, but they're holding. And now the rumors are that Éric Duhem himself may run in this riding when the by-election is called. So something to look forward to because we're going to have, two very interesting by-elections in Quebec. The one in Terrebonne, I think it's a foregone conclusion that the Parti québécois should win this. But Arthabasca could show us how deep the CAQ has been cut and cut to shreds maybe. So Arthabasca, something to look forward to in 2025.
And when the leading party is at 30%, anything can happen.
Absolutely.
Anything could happen. So the Conservatives could find themselves in the National Assembly for the first time, which would be quite a thing and something that I think the CAQ would have to worry about a lot because they've lost a lot of support to the PQ. But if the Conservatives start to look a little bit more viable, then they could also lose some of that wing as well. And it's not unimaginable, even though they're quite different parties, that the Conservatives could kind of replace the CQ as the right-of-center option in Quebec. It's possible. I know they're very different parties. The Conservatives are very federalist versus a more autonomous CQ, but I don't know. Some of those voters might feel like they're no longer motivated by constitutional issues and so can go over to the Conservatives. Either way, they lose anything more and they lose it to the Conservatives, the CQ is
done.
In a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
Okay. Nova Scotia. So, Tuesday night, Nova Scotia's election. The polls are closing at, I believe, 7:30
local
our time, Eastern, and 8:30 Atlantic. Either 7 or 8. Can't recall. We are going to have a live stream, so you'll be able to find it on this channel. I'll put it up probably in the next few days, so you can join us for that, and it'll be a lot of fun. I'm hoping we get some more polls this weekend.
We will.
There was a debate last week. There was another debate a couple of days ago. We've only had one poll that's been published since then. It was from Narrative Research that came out yesterday. Now, the poll was in the field for nearly 2 weeks, so it had some post-debate stuff, some pre-debate stuff. It had 44% for the Progressive Conservatives, 28% for the NDP, 24% for the Liberals, and 3% for the Greens. I find this poll interesting because we've seen from surveys done by Abacus that Claudia Chender, the NDP leader, has very good personal ratings. And you see in this survey that the NDP is ahead of the Liberals now by 4 points. The last Abacus poll had the Liberals in second place. And on preferred premier, the gap between Chender and Zach Churchill, the Liberal leader, is 8 points.
Yeah,
whereas among voting intentions, the gap is only 4. So will we see the NDP maybe put some distance between itself and the Liberals and shore up its position as official opposition? Doesn't seem like the PCs are in any trouble. But before we get into the electoral map, any comments on this poll we saw from Narrative Research?
Well, I think it's steady as she goes. Whether the NDP or the Liberals is second, I think it varies by a point or two here and there. We see a 4-point lead for the NDP for second place here. There will be another poll by Cardinal Research. It hasn't been published yet, but it will soon. And it's a more than a 20-point lead for the PCs and a tight battle between the Liberals and NDP. So nothing out of the ordinary. We're looking for that in the next few hours, maybe. And since Abacus has been on the field, we expect them to publish something over the weekend. And Main Street Research also rarely rarely misses an election. So I think we're going to have more data.
We can expect a forum as well at
11:59, yeah, local.
10:59 Eastern Time, 11:59 Atlantic.
Okay, so the Liberals are in big trouble. They're in big trouble, but this reminds me very much of the Ontario numbers. I was asked many times online and by journalists, observers, how much trouble is the OLP? And I want to speak about Nova Scotia here, but the analogy with the OLP is like, well, they had only a handful of seats. I think it was 8 seats in the last election, the OLP. They still had 24% of the vote. This is something to build on. And I think for the Liberals, they're heading towards a crushing defeat where they could win 2, 3 seats, maybe 0. 0 is not impossible for the Nova Scotia Liberals. But if you win a quarter of the vote, this is still something to build on. It's not like I don't feel like this is a very. I think the results will be exaggerated, right? The first past the post moment that we have. If we look at the numbers from Narrative, Eric, what really hurts for the Liberals is their numbers in Halifax. So in Halifax, 39% for the PCs, 35% for the NDP, 21% for the Liberals, distant third. And if you don't win in Halifax and you don't do well in rural regions and you're not doing that well around Cape Breton, where are you going to win seats, right? So a 0 would be devastating for sure. But if the Nova Scotia Liberals, if let's say they do have a quarter of the vote, and they hold on to 3, 4, 5 seats, they could be okay in the long run. But those numbers, as you mentioned, Claudia Chender, she seems to be very well appreciated. Her numbers might take a dive if the NDP really does well in this election, because suddenly she will be seen as a threat to the status quo. But I think, we asked our members to vote for our special episode of November, and they rejected our idea to go seat by seat to do a projection meeting. It would have gone pretty fast.
Yeah,
many of those would be safe blue. So what do you? So what about you, Eric? What do you see in those numbers? Is there something that I'm missing?
No, I think that's about it. And like you said, in Halifax, 4-point lead for the PCs. Now, this is the Halifax Regional Municipality, which is a huge municipality and includes lots of rural areas and suburbs, as well as the center of Halifax itself. And what we've seen from some of the other polls is that when it is broken down between urban and suburban, it is quite close in the urban core. So if it's 4-point lead for the PCs across the whole HRM, in all likelihood, the NDP might be doing very well in the downtown core. So that is why they are in a good position to win 7, 8, 9 seats, almost all of them in Halifax, maybe one in Cape Breton. But it's just impossible to see the Liberals winning 7, 8, 9 seats. Because in the rest of the mainland, the only place where they are kind of clearly in second, and even then it's a small sample. They're 3 points ahead of the NDP, but they're 25 points behind the PCs. So they're gonna they risk really finishing second everywhere, or almost everywhere outside of Halifax, but first in very, very few ridings. So my projections right now have the Liberals winning 2 seats. One of them is Yarmouth, so Zach Churchill's riding. The other one is Sydney member 2, but I don't know. Cape Breton can move in its own way, and we don't have a lot of polling out of Cape Breton with big samples. But can you imagine that the Liberals get reduced to 1 seat? It is Zach Churchill's. What does the party do there?
You don't turf the leader. Because he's it.
If he resigns, that's it. So the Liberals could be in some real trouble here, because for the Liberals, the ones that I have that really could be ones that they're going to be looking at. So Bedford Basin, Clayton Park West, Timberlake Prospect, they could maybe hold on to those.
Halifax Atlantic? What do you have in Halifax Atlantic?
See, that's it. There's 2 seats that are really hard to call. There's Halifax Atlantic and Northside Westmount, because the PCs picked up a Liberal MLA. Will voters follow them? Halifax Atlantic, I don't think was really a good seat for the PCs, but with the former Liberal MLA running for the PCs, kind of think that the PCs will probably pick that up, right? So there's the gains that I have for the PCs from the Liberals in Halifax are Bedford South, Cole Harbour, Dartmouth, Halifax Atlantic, and Hammonds Plains, Lucasville, picking up Clare in the southwest, and if they pick up Northside Westmount in Cape Breton. And then the NDP could pick up Fairview, Clayton Park in Halifax, and maybe pick up Halifax Armdale and other ridings like that. But there's not too much.
I agree with Armdale. Okay.
Yeah, and that one, the Liberals actually might finish third in that one. It could be a PC-NDP race. But it is primarily Liberal PC. There's not a huge amount of NDP PC battles.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I mean, this map right now, if you, I mean, of course, there's we don't know how well Miss Smith McCrossan will do. We don't have local polling in Cumberland North, but we assume that she's going to win. She had dominant numbers in the past election, and nothing. We had nothing. So again, go with the data that we have, not the data we wish we had. But that map is entirely blue except for Halifax and a tiny little bit, I don't know, out east in Sydney and Cape Breton. What do you have in Glaze Bay Dominion?
That one I have is more or less a PC NDP toss.
Yeah, me too.
I think with the NDP's numbers, like in the narrative poll, again, 67 respondents, so it's not very big. But the NDP was at 28%. 1 point behind the Liberals, and the PCs are at 44. I mean, I think that the NDP could be able to hold their riding in on Cape Breton Island. That, especially with the fact that the NDP's vote is up since the last election, it seems like they could. It seems unlikely that they're going to lose a lot of seats, if any. So I would still think that the NDP holds on to that one, but I wouldn't be surprised if we have one Liberal seat in Yarmouth, and even then, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
It's more or less a leader bonus, kind of keeping Churchill afloat in my model, at least. But I wouldn't be surprised if you have Yarmouth Liberal, Glace Bay Dominion NDP, and then everything else, aside from Cumberland North, PC Blue in that province.
So your ceiling for the PCs, like let's say the PCs do super well. Like they beat their polls because okay, dear pollsters, when you poll the Greens, don't forget that they don't have half a slate again.
Yeah.
Right. So what was it? MQO,
at least narrative only had him at 3.
Yeah. So, and I think 2% would be a good result considering the Greens don't have a slate. Could the PCs win 50?
Oh, that seems tough. There's 55 seats.
Yeah.
Because my floor right now for the NDP is 7.
Okay.
Now, that's a generous floor. It's not like a worst-case scenario floor. But for me, my ceiling for the PCs right now is about 46 seats
Okay.
out of the 55. So that would probably mean the NDP winning 7, Independents winning 1, and maybe the Liberals winning 1.
Wow.
I guess it's possible then, if they could go up a little bit more. I'm not sure what's going to happen with the Independent.
Yeah.
The PC candidate there last time had like almost no support. All that vote went there. But this was during the pandemic, and she was someone who was against some of the pandemic measures. Are those PC voters really motivated by that anymore? I don't know. Will some of them go back to the PCs and maybe they win that seat too? I'm not sure. That'll be something to keep an eye on election night, but it doesn't really matter. PCs don't need it, and it really only has an impact on Smith McCrossan's own personal future. It's not going to play a role in the legislature, but it could be a very, very early night. I think it's going to be very easy to call the election for the PCs.
I mean, do you know whether they use tabulators? Because in New Brunswick, that was fast, right? And thing is, New Brunswick, it wasn't close, New Brunswick, but we kind of expect it to be closer. We don't expect it to be close. This could take 20 minutes, literally.
Yeah.
Right? I remember when the CAQ won in 2022, I think the CTV News called it, the vote counting started at 8 p.m. It was 8:08 and CTV News called it. That was obviously, the outcome was, we knew what the outcome would be, but 8 minutes, that would be a short live stream.
Yeah.
We could say 1 hour minimum. We could say 1 hour.
Yeah, at least. I'd like to see what's going to happen with some of these other candidates, what's going to happen with the Liberals. And especially what's going to happen in Halifax, because we do have the federal by-election in Halifax that has to be called by the beginning of March.
Yeah.
And if the government does survive to the next budget, then they will have to call that by-election. But if the NDP does this well as we expect them to do in Halifax, and the Liberals do as poorly as we're expected them to do, I know that you can't translate provincial to federal, but I do imagine that would make the federal Liberals a little worried about how well they're going to do in that by-election.
You would think they would be worried anyway.
They should be. Yeah.
I agree. Yeah. If they're not worried, they're not paying attention. So.
Yeah. I am very curious to see what the last set of polls will show, because this is the first one from Narrative that we've had during this campaign. But the other polls that we saw from Abacus, from MQO and all that, 47-50% for the PCs, right? This is 44. So is this just Narrative being a little lower, or are they picking up on a post-debate kind of dip for the PCs? Because the gap right now between the NDP and the PCs is 16 points. It was 25 in some of the early surveys.
Yeah.
It's still, the NDP support is still too low outside of Halifax to have them really put the PCs under any pressure. But I am curious to see if maybe the landslide that we're kind of expecting gets whittled down over the next few days. If we see more of these polls that suggest that things are getting closer. If we get some more polls, if Cardinal comes out and has 47-50, if Abacus comes out with 47-50, then yeah, we're probably not waiting around too much. But I am curious to see if the PCs, if their gamble to call this election early will end up paying off, or if they're just going to squeak by at the end of the campaign. Just the notion that if this had lasted a couple of weeks longer, maybe they would have been in some difficulty. But I really doubt it. There doesn't really seem to be a lot of signs that the PCs are really in any vulnerable position at all.
I agree.
All right. Do you want to move on to the number of the week?
Yeah. So I think many Canadians noticed that they haven't received any mail this week.
I'm not sure if that many Canadians noticed, but anyway.
Well, have you heard about the recent strike at Canadian ports and those as Montreal and Vancouver? That's one thing. And also the strike with Poste Canada. 67% said they heard about the strikes in the ports. And we had the numbers that were not published, but I was told that there are similar numbers with Canada Post. Oh, hang on, no. Those numbers were published by Léger. 86% say they've heard of a possible strike by Canada Post, but they were newer numbers. Anyway, so many Canadians are aware, and I think it's once again, it's a tough spot for the Liberals because you want the country to be running as smoothly as possible when you're the government, but do you want to go to get involved into a major strike that the appearance will be that the Liberals are against unions and worker rights, and the NDP once again will blame the Liberals for not being on the side of the workers. A lose-lose situation for the Liberals with those strikes.
Yeah, it's hard to come out ahead of those. So my number of the week, I'm stealing a little bit from what I wrote on the writ this week, but it is 76%. So 76% of premiers or prime ministers in the past who have tried to win 4 elections in a row have lost seats between their third and their fourth elections. The winning record for leaders who try to win 4 in a row has gotten pretty bad over the last 60, 70 years. It's about a 50-50 chance that they're able to do it. Earlier leaders, some of those dynasties back then, it was easier to win 4 in a row. But the winning record might be mixed, but the ability to hold on to your vote, to hold on to your seats after that long in office is really, really tough. 3 out of 4 lose some seats. And on average, the amount of seats they lose would be the equivalent of the Liberals losing about 40 seats in the current context. That would be enough for them to lose government. Unlikely you can hold on with a minority with 120-ish seats. No. Though right now they would take 120-ish seats, I think, because they're on track for half of that. But the historical precedent for Justin Trudeau is just very, very poor. It's very hard to win 4 in a row. Really, really hard to not lose seats in 4 in a row. So we'll see. Maybe his birthday is somewhere around Christmas, if it's not Christmas Day itself.
It's Christmas Day.
And maybe it'll be a time for reflection. Yeah. So I don't know. We'll see. We're doing on our special episode we're going to be doing next week, we're doing a 2025 leader resignation draft.
Yes.
I think Trudeau's probably going to be pretty high in the draft, but I wonder if maybe he won't make it to December 31st. We will see.
Have our members decided how we choose the first pick?
I have an idea.
You have an idea? Okay.
All right. But I'm going to reveal it.
This is going to be a fun special episode, people. If you're listening to this and you want to get more of our episodes for Eric and I, go to www.thenumberspod.ca. Sign up to be one of our members. You get access to the Discord. You get the bonus episodes, and so far they have been great. So thank you for those who signed up. I very much appreciate that.
Yeah, and we're going to answer some of those members' questions in our mailbag episode, which we're just about to record. But other than that, Philippe, we're going to be chatting again on Tuesday night for the Nova Scotia live stream, so people can tune into that. And I'm going to look forward to spending yet another night on a live stream with you. And maybe I might see if I can find some Nova Scotia.
Oh, that's true.
Some Nova Scotia vibration.
Yeah.
I know that.
Yeah.
They're big. They got lots out there, so I'm sure it'll be easy. All right. Thanks so much, everybody.
Merci tout le monde.